With the announcement of Pokemon ZA, we are all wondering what the story is going to look like, and I'm going to be talking about my theory on what to expect from Pokemon ZA's story. So let's not waste any more of your time and get straight into the video. When you think about what the story is going to look like for Pokemon ZA, you're almost always going to think about AZ. I mean, come on. Essentially, his name is in the title, and there's going to be a 99.9% chance he is going to be in the story. Because for those of you who don't know, AZ isn't your typical average nobody, he's actually immortal. How the story goes is that AZ took part in the Kalos War, which then led to his own Floette being killed in the process. Heartbroken, AZ invented a machine that harnessed both the powers of Xerneas and Yveltal, the legendary Pokemon of death and life, in order to give eternal life and bring the dead back to life. At the cost of draining the life energy of other Pokemon, he used it to recover his Floette, which in turn also made them both immortal. Floette was heartbroken after finding out the methods AZ used in order to resurrect her, so she left him, and it wasn't until Pokemon X and Y where they later reunited, hence the meme "it's been 3,000 years. So now that you're all caught up, let me explain on what AZ's part in the story could look like in Pokemon Legends ZA. First things first, I believe it's right for us to think that AZ is going to be way more stressed and hopeless before we met him in X and Y. This is simply due to the fact that he hasn't reunited with his Floette at this time, but he is also still dealing with the consequences of his past actions. Now, I'm not entirely sure what major role he could play in the story, but I could definitely see him as either a reoccurring character on our journey or even a wise guru that just enlightens us on his failures and tells us even more about the Kalos War. Who knows? Now, there's still tons of other stuff to talk about, such as who the main villain could even be in the new game. We can definitely cross out AZ since he didn't come across as one when we saw him in the X and Y games. Like I mentioned earlier, he's hopeless and lost because of what he's caused to the world. He's just a shell of the king he once was. While we're on the topic of crossing out possible villains, you guys might say something about Team Flare and how they can't be villains since they most likely didn't exist at the time, which although you're sort of right, I don't believe Team Flare won't have any involvement at all in the new game. What I mean by this is that Lysander once said that he had some relation to the king 3,000 years ago, which he was referring to AZ of course. This means that although he wasn't alive at that time, there were definitely some sort of prior history that led him to be the way he was and created the iconic villain team we know today as Team Flare. I believe that we're going to be really searching for the root of Team Flare's upbringing, as well as the connection between AZ and Lysander's lineage. This was something that I believe Game Freak knew went wrong with Legends Arceus. There were still so many questions left unanswered even for a lore-focused game, like how Team Galactic turned from a recon squad for good into a corrupt organization for evil. This new game is going to be the key to not only the past, but also the future. The reason I say this is due to my biggest theory yet, and that is the fact that I believe that this game will be taking place post-Kalos War. Now, I know this is going to sound a bit crazy, but hear me out. First off, it was revealed in the trailer that Lumio City was undergoing a complete revamp of both architecture and technology. Not only that, but I have some pretty solid evidence that the game is probably going to be taking place in 1900s Paris. Take a look at this. These are all images of 1900s Paris, and if you take a quick look at the architecture and layout of the buildings between both 1900s Paris and the Lumio City we see in the trailer, you'll start to notice some striking similarities. So if my theory is correct and we are indeed in 1900s territory, then this is not only post-Kalos War, but also way closer to the modern day than we think. Not only that, but I believe that the people in the sketches are definitely wearing more modern day looking outfits. This also further proves that we could see some connection to Team Flare, and that our villain could have some deep connection to Lysander or Team Flare in general. But that's all for the villain talk, since we just don't have too much to go off of just yet. But that's not all. We also need to discuss a very important topic, which is going to be the involvement of the Aura Trio, that being Zygarde, Xerneas, and Yveltal. We know that their involvement is going to be present in the new game, or at least Zygarde will be, since the letter Z is literally in the title. But I also don't see a reason as to why we won't see Xerneas or Yveltal as well. But the real question is, what kind of role would they even play in the new game? I'm sure they're going to be way more involved in Legends ZA since they were merely there for 2 seconds in X and Y. My main theory as to their involvement in the new game is going to be some sort of catastrophe looming across Lumio City, and I know what you're gonna say, Pokey, that sounds so basic and bland, but just think about it for a sec. I believe that Xerneas and Yveltal are going to be in some sort of clash during this new era, similar to Kyogre and Groudon's relationship from Auraz, but instead of them fighting for their respective concept, they're going to be pitted against each other, and something or someone is going to be tipping the balance and disrupting the peace. Which is where Zygarde comes in, as he's the one who maintains balance, peace, and order. Zygarde is definitely going to be on the front row, since it's obviously his game at the end of the day. But this is my theory on how the game is going to take on Zygarde, from both a character and gameplay perspective. From a character perspective, I believe we will meet or even accompany a Zygarde core on her journey. This is mainly going to tie into the imbalance of life and death, and in turn have the Zygarde core come to us for our help into restoring order and peace. You guys might start to think that this is starting to sound really familiar, and that's because this trope is something that's actually already been done in the Pokemon anime, specifically the XYZ series. This trope is already shown with an interesting character in said series, with that being Bonnie from the main crew in the Kalos region. Bonnie is actually some normal kid on the crew until she discovers one of the cores completely on accident, which then led her to take care of it as her very own Pokemon. On the crew's journey, the Zygarde core used them as a means to try and stop the future catastrophe regarding Team Flare, which I can definitely see happening in the new Legends ZA game, with one of the Zygarde cores helping us out, and at the climax of our adventure, Zygarde will reach a new form that is beyond 100%. Instead, it will be a 200% form. Now, although that sounds a bit far-fetched, there's definitely a high probability that Zygarde will gain a new form in his very own game. The same happened when the Crows went Solgaleo, as well as the Primals, so there really isn't a solid reason as to why they wouldn't give Zygarde a new form, especially if it's for the final battle against the main antagonist in the new game. Plus, I'll say this again, it's his own game. Like, come on, there's actually no way. Now that we talked from a story perspective, let's talk about how this could be handled from a gameplay perspective. Although this seems like a very hard thing to tackle in game, there's actually many ways the story trope can be handled into gameplay, but I'm going to be explaining likely the best one. First off, they did something kind of similar with Miraidon and Koraidon with Scarlet and Violet, where they helped us not only with travel, but with actual story too. The same thing can be done with Zygarde. I mean, just think about it. Zygarde has a 10% form that can be perfect for ground travel, while he has a 50% form that can be used for underground travel, which doesn't seem like a bad idea. And lastly, a 100% form to take to the skies. All of this seems awesome to me, especially thinking about how cool it would be to ride on a freaking Megazord. Now, as for 200% form Zygarde, I'm thinking they'll tackle it similar to the way they did with G-Max Eternatus, where the actual form is busted in terms of stats, but you can't actually use it, except the only difference in this game would be that you would be able to use 200% Zygarde, but just in Legends ZA, which I think would work since the Legends games don't have online battling. Now, to finish things off, I wanted to talk about Xerneas and Yveltal, since there have been people talking about whether or not they'll be getting new forms, and here are my thoughts on this. Now, though I don't personally think Xerneas and Yveltal will be receiving new forms, especially if it's Zygarde's own game, let's just think hypothetically. Hypothetically speaking, if Xerneas and Yveltal were to get brand new forms, I believe it would tie into them reaching a new peak of power, Xerneas gaining an even greater control over life, while Yveltal gains more power over death itself. But instead of them getting a complete boost to their stats, because I mean they're already broken as it is, they will probably just obtain different typings and abilities. For Xerneas, I could see her gaining a grass type to represent life, and for Yveltal, I could see him gaining ghost replacing flying, representing his dark and terrifying figure. But well, my friends, that is it for today's video and my theory on what's to come in Pokemon Legends ZA. I hope you enjoyed this video and be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It helps me out so much in the long run. And comment down below what you think is going to happen in Pokemon Legends ZA and if you think any of these theories hold true to some degree. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.